1987 was a very interesting year in history of computing. IBM introduced its PS2 personal computer that later on became a standard for desktop PCs made by both IBM and clone manufacturers. And they've also unveiled their brand new VGA display standard that led to creation of famous VGA graphic cards. First of these were released the very same year by ATI, and while they were not widespread then yet, they offered impressive capabilities of high resolution and high color graphics. GIF, or however else you wanna call it, was created by CompuServe and over the next few years became very popular, offering decent quality reproduction of static and moving images at low disk space cost. But what's important for us here today is that in 1987, Amiga 500 was released. So it's as good time as any other to ask you to hit those like and subscribe buttons below. It's just a couple of clicks for you, but helps me more than you know. Thanks! Anyway, as I was saying, in 1987 Commodore released two new models, targeting home users low-cost Amiga 500 and more business and professionals-oriented Amiga 2000. First came with 512 KB of RAM, Kickstart 1.2, later replaced with 1.3, and was based around OCS chipset. All that at the time made Amiga 500 the most advanced and capable low-cost gaming home computer, offering easily accessible colorful graphics and 4 8-bit stereo digital sound channels. It made the model so popular that it is estimated that throughout its lifespan, over 50,000 individual software packages, so both games and programs, were released for it. Amiga 2000 had many submodels over the course of its production, but the initial model was virtually identical to Amiga 500, just in the PC-like case with multiple 02 and ISA expansion slots, making it infinitely more upgradable, but also quite more costly. Regardless of how 1987 may have been interesting in itself, however, we're not here to talk about it, but notable games that were released on the Amiga. So, let's get on with it. Even though Test Drive might have felt more like a demo or a beta version of Test Drive 2, it was still, for better or worse, first game trying to be semi-realistic driving simulation on the Amiga. Technically speaking, it wasn't great and nowhere near as marvelous as the C64 version that offered basically same features. But very detail-heavy specifications for available cars and impressively rendered side views of these in the menus sparked my childhood imagination and made me feel as if I could drive one of these beasts. I couldn't, cause as soon as you started driving you'll quickly realize that the constantly breaking windscreen is not the experience you were looking for. Obviously, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but this in reality was neither simulation nor arcade racer. Something in between that was just okay at best. But was important nonetheless because without it we wouldn't get Test Drive 2 and basically most other modern racing simulations. Additionally, Amiga's version was the best looking out of all available on the market, which is good to know. Roadwar 2000, like its title kinda suggests, is basically a Mad Max game. Unlike the movies, it does not take place in Australia but in the USA, where a terrorist group released a deadly and quickly spreading virus that devastated the population. As a result of that, United States collapsed, government, finance, society, all that gone in a matter of weeks. Not all died, however, and quickly Mad Max-esque survivalist groups and gangs emerged, utilizing cars as main means of transportation and combat. Your task initially is to build big and strong enough force to clear the pathways, roads, between the cities. All that by fighting off gangs, mutants and cannibals to finally secure cities under your control. That may bring your actions to attention of the broken leftovers of government, who then may eventually recruit you to rescue 8 scientists. Apparently country's last hope of fighting off the disease. Roadwar 2000 is SSI's turn-based strategy game that may not be the most easily accessible, but is an interesting and unusual title and one of the very first few tackling imaginary post-apocalyptic events. Although in the light of the last 2 years, I'm not sure word imaginary should even be here. Many things could be said about Cinemaware's The Three Stooges. Things like it was a semi-random collection of odd minigames that were a bit on a difficult side. Or that sometimes you just weren't sure what to do when playing it first, as nothing seemed to be explained anywhere in-game. But other than that, the game was faithful to the Three Stooges atmosphere and full of fun mini-gags and skits. Cinemaware's touch is present everywhere, from music and sounds to incredible graphics and huge sprites. At the time, these were possible at this quality on the Amiga only, as PCs were not nearly as capable yet. So, as with many other games in these first few years of the system, Commodore's 16-bit machine's version was the best out of all. The story behind all those mini-events is that the Stooges are trying to raise money to save an orphanage. What's notable about it though is that it's one of the very first few games that actually offered multiple endings, depending on how well player did throughout gameplay. Although 1987 saw release of world games as well, it's the winter games that were the most notable release by Epix. It allowed, which was not standard by then on the Amiga, for up to 8 players to complete sequentially in series of Winter Olympics inspired events. It didn't hurt that they were quite fun too, especially when played against others. As with most games series titles by Epix, controls required both getting used to and practice. And while this was just a port of C64's original with graphical improvements, it was quite good. Perhaps not as good as impressive as it was on much weaker C64, but worth having a go with a couple of friends anyway. Epix would go on and milk the game series on all systems for the next few years, releasing many different titles, some more realistic than others, with various success. But it was the winter games that was their most notable outing in the early days of the Amiga, for better or worse. Little Computer People was a title unlike any other, at least back in the day. Originally released in 1985 on C64 and 2 years later ported to the Amiga. For all intents and purposes, it can be considered the Sims of 1980s. The game has one screen showing side view of the inside of a 3-story house, and after a while person will move in. Each copy of the game had a randomly generated person created on first boot, so no 2 copies ever played the same. Said person will go about their day, cooking, watching TV, reading newspaper or doing various other things, and occasionally will initiate interaction with a player, talking about their needs or feelings. While it's pretty limited, a player can also interact with a person by typing in basic commands or playing games with them. It may have not been as advanced or sandboxy as The Sims were, feeling more like Advanced Aquarium or Tamagotchi, but for the time when no one heard of anything similar before, it was a breath of fresh air and a subject of many conversations. If it's not clear by now, Cinemaware were absolute kings in the early days of Amiga, releasing beautifully designed, unique titles in various, often mixed genres with absolutely unbeatable presentation. The King of Chicago is no different. It's an action-adventure interactive movie-like game that the majority of takes place in 1930s in Chicago, just after Al Capone's imprisonment, and the story is based on numerous Hollywood gangster movies. The goal of the game is to have the biggest gang in the city and to take over all mob activity in Chicago before a set date. To do so, players have many mobster activities at hand, like bombings, drive-by shootings, bribing officials and gambling. And everything you do and how you interact with other characters will influence how you're perceived by everyone around you. If that wasn't enough, staying ahead of the law that's always after you, and keeping good relationship with Mayor and your woman for that matter, were also a must. With so many things to do, multiple paths that can be taken and many endings, it's doubtful that any 2 playthroughs of King of Chicago could end up being identical. Earl Weaver Baseball is bar none the best baseball game on the Amiga. Chances are it may be one of the best baseball games on all systems. Sure, the presentation is quite lacking, especially when it comes to graphics, but don't let it scare you. The game is an unpolished gem that offered more than most competing titles of the time. In fact, it should be considered more as a baseball sandbox than just a game. You could create nearly anything baseball fan could dream of. Players along with the stats for them, schedules and baseball parks. It offered most of the real baseball parks from the 80s, along with the current then and historical players. And when played, it was instantly clear that it's more of a simulation than an arcade title. To this day, Earl Weaver Baseball is considered a marvel among the sports fans that had a chance to experience it in the 80s. Personally, I don't care much for any sport, but can definitely appreciate the importance of a sports game when I see one. And this one set a real high bar. In the very first years of home gaming, not many titles could compete with popularity of Pong, and then, a bit later on, Tetris. 2 arcade titles most definitely could, Pac-Man and Arkanoid. Arkanoid seemed to be ported to everything under the sun in the late 80s, and grand majority of those conversions were very good. Amiga's outing is no different. It sports arcade's introduction, all stages, music and sounds, and looks virtually identical. In my opinion, perhaps even a tiny bit better than the arcade original. Porting the controls from arcade struggle to Amiga's mouse rather than joystick was also a good move, as those fast, analog controls allowed for split-second decisions to be performed and near-death saves actually possible. I don't think there's anyone who doesn't know how to play Arkanoid, especially anyone watching this video, but on an odd chance I'm wrong. In short, you've got to bounce progressively faster moving ball with a paddle that's at the bottom to clear all blocks from the screen. While doing so, you pick up various power-ups that make the task easier. That's it. 1987 was the first year that brought an ocean worth of releases to the Amiga. Perhaps there weren't as many of them as they would be in the next few years, but players finally had a lot to choose from. All genres seemed to be represented by at least a couple of choices, and it looked like Amiga had a great future ahead of it. Sierra Online saw an opportunity and decided to port their adventure games from PC, 7 in total in 1 year. All using the AGI engine and different iterations of same text-based parser. The games were Black Cauldron, first Three Kings Quest titles, and first Space Quest, Police Quest, and Leisure Suit Larry. They were all universally praised for their storylines, atmosphere, and often considered staples of the genre. In the same time, they were disliked by many, for the difficulty and in some cases annoying death traps. They all rolled into one spot on this list as they were all important titles in history of gaming. All very similar in how they worked, and many of them written by now legendary Roberta Williams. Personally, I was never a fan, mainly because of the text parsers, and hence why the recording for this spot you're seeing is borrowed from other YouTube channels. On the first glance, Ports of Call is a business simulation game where you manage a global fleet of freight ships, balancing those profits and losses for the sake of your bottom line, all to grow a company into international transport powerhouse eventually. And while it's actually a correct description of the game, it's also not all that it is. There are also quite a few random arcade-like elements of either parking in or leaving ports, avoiding icebergs, and even saving shipwrecked sailors among others. The game can be played in very enjoyable hot seat multiplayer mode, where players compete for the global domination. And that's where it shines the most. What's most important though is that it's not overly complicated, management-wise, and not too difficult in its arcade section, so can be enjoyed by players of various genre preferences. If you'd like to learn more about it, I have a whole separate video on Ports of Call on my channel where I tackle it in more detail. So go and have a look. Deja Vu: A Nightmare Comes True was an innovative point-and-click adventure game. It worked off an engine that resembled window-based interface of operating systems of yesteryear and used verbs to control the interactions. Other than that, it was full drag and drop, meaning any item pickups could be done via mouse by dragging items straight into inventory. Quite novel was a concept of dropping items anywhere in the game, and if you could only remember where you left them, you could come back in any moment to pick them back up. But it's not what made the game popular. Deja Vu was a heavy noir story. You're an ex-boxer turned private investigator who wakes up in a random bar's bathroom with an unexpected amnesia and a dead body, clearly killed using your own gun. And you are after both, your lost memories and a true killer to clear your name. All that while avoiding the mob and the law. What's important though is that the game did not use any supernatural reasons for whatever's happening, meaning you could use logic and deduction to solve all puzzles. The Faery Tale adventure is an action role-playing game designed by one man, David Joyner. And he did hell of a job, all by himself working on graphics, music and story. Could it have benefited from a larger team and a budget? Perhaps, but what David did here is just outstanding. The game's 14,000 unique screens in size. For whatever reason in the past, game worlds were measured in screens. That said, it's a big one. And for better or worse, as in best titles in the genre, from ground up you can basically go anywhere, even somewhere where you've no chances of survival. Which some may consider a downside, but I enjoy having a freedom to choose. Anyway, gameplay revolves around three brothers who are on the quest of recovering a stolen by the forces of evil talisman and returning it to their home village, Tembry. Interestingly enough, you control only one of the three and are allowed control of another only if the earlier brother failed. I do not think it's a system that I've seen in a game before, and other than cannon fodder, I'm not sure I've ever seen it since. Toasty! I'm sure that after watching the video, you'll agree that 1987 was indeed a good year for the Amiga. The games that were released were clearly of considerably higher standard than those that came before, not only in terms of graphics and sound, but most importantly design. Developers slowly started getting the grips of Amiga's specialized chipset, and it reflected in the quality of games released. That, however, was just the beginning. The best titles for the Commodore's 16-bit machine were still to come, and each consecutive year saw better and more inventive outings. But that's something we'll talk in more detail in the next few videos. Some of the clips for this video were sampled in small parts from other YouTube channels. For various reasons, I may have not been able to run the game, or it would have taken days to get to the point I wanted to show, or I'm just not good enough at particular title anymore, so it was better to show someone more skilled at it. All channels are clearly indicated with a blue bar showing their respective names and in the description. These are all great channels and I wholeheartedly recommend subscribing to them as they serve rock solid content. If you liked the video, please hit those like and subscribe buttons below. And if you're in a more generous mood, you may even want to consider joining my Patreon, or a small donation. That would help me deliver more better quality content, maybe even get a camera. Details are in the description below. For me, however, this is all, so have a good one and I'll see you next time. Peace.